Hey, good morning, guys. Today is Thursday, March 26th, 2020, and this video is going to be like the previous video that I have recorded for you guys in the past, and it is going to give you a synopsis or a summary of Chapter 8, Section 2. After this video, I will be posting an answer key for Chapter 8 also. So make sure that you look out for that key. And another quick little announcement is I'm going to be scheduling voluntary extra credit Google Meet web chats or webcam chats, whatever you want to call it, where you guys are going to get the opportunity for each of our classes to meet up via Google Meet and to discuss the pandemic situation and the political current events that are surrounding that in regards to the pandemic. So be on the lookout for that. Each class will be getting a Google Calendar invite that should be rolling out either today on Thursday or tomorrow, March 27th on Friday. All right, so let's take a look at Section 2. Section 2 is something that I personally find very interesting, but I'm sure maybe a lot of you may find boring. You guys know I'm always very real with you guys. But I think this is really interesting. It's talking about the birth of political parties, or where do political parties come from. So I'm going to scroll through the pages like I did before, maybe use some of the drawing tools, highlighting tools, and all that. So let's start with political parties emerge. This is like an introduction to this section. It first tells you that, or it gives you the definition of the word faction, which is an organized political group. And if you go down or scroll down to the bottom, it gives you an introduction to Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. It gives you an introduction in the sense that these two gentlemen are going to be rivals, political rivals in early America and early American politics. So it tells you that Hamilton warned that the spirit of faction might work like a spark to bring mob rule and chaos. So we're going to talk a little bit about how each of these individuals felt about political parties, where they stood, and everything like that. If we scroll down to the next page, it goes on to tell you that no one was more hostile to factions than George Washington. What that means is that George Washington totally disagreed with the idea of political parties or factions. He thought they were actually entirely dangerous to politics and to our early American government. But right underneath Washington's nose in his own cabinet, we had Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson in his cabinet creating their own factions as they begin to grow apart politically. And it goes on to say, despite Washington's efforts by the early 1790s, two political parties were beginning to form. One group supported Jefferson and his ally, James Madison. These guys would become eventual presidents themselves. And then the other groups of people supported Hamilton. So essentially we had two political parties forming here, which we're going to talk a little bit more. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. One group was led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and the other group was led by Alexander Hamilton. All right. I like this chart on this page. It makes things very easy for you guys to see the differences between these two political groups. But let's start at the top. Republicans against Federalists. So it says two parties that took shape during the first half in the 1790s were the parties, the Republicans and the Federalists. So there were really two political parties that began to form, guys, underneath or inside Washington's cabinet. The first being the Federalists. This was the group that was led by Alexander Hamilton. And they were going to argue that a strong federal government, or a super strong federal government, was going to be needed to keep order in the country. And then the other group we can call Republicans or Anti-Federalists, and they were led by Thomas Jefferson, who would argue that, yeah, we need a federal government, but less government is somewhat better. Okay? So it goes on to read in the book. Let me highlight it here. Let me get this highlighter thing here. It said that they argued that the federal government was growing too strong under President Washington. Well, that's talking about the Republicans or Democratic Republicans. Let me highlight that right here. And that was their belief. It wasn't their belief that we didn't need a federal government or that federal government was useless. They believed in federal government, but they were afraid that the federal government was going to become too strong. And conversely, Alexander Hamilton was going to say that we're going to need a super strong central government for us to succeed. So let's take a look at the differences. I love this chart down here. So let's first take a look, and I'll use a red pen to talk about the Anti-Federalists, the Republicans, the Democratic Republicans. So I'm going to talk about this here. So the Republicans or Democratic Republicans or the Anti-Federalists, first they were led by Thomas Jefferson. So there's this little picture up in the corner there. And one of the main tenets or beliefs of the Republicans or the Anti-Federalists was that the power should be seated within the people, that all people should hold some political power. Another important belief is that the Republicans or the Anti-Federalists believe in strong state or local governments, because remember, they believed that the federal government was becoming too strong or too powerful. So therefore, they thought it would be better that we seat more power in the local or the state governments. Another quick little thing that I don't emphasize too much, but number 4 for Republicans or Anti-Federalists, this is emphasized agriculture. So what that means is that Jefferson imagined a country where our economy was based off of small businesses or farmers or local businesses. Anyway, to move on, number 5, it says favors a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Well, remember, there's 2 ways that you can read the Constitution, a loose interpretation or a strict interpretation. A strict interpretation of the Constitution means that Thomas Jefferson and his followers believed that you could only do or pass a law, I guess to put it better, to pass a law that is only written within the Constitution. If something isn't written in the Constitution, then you can't do it. It's as simple as that. So a strict interpretation just means if it's written in the Constitution, you can do it. If it's not written in the Constitution, well, you can't do it. And that's what a strict interpretation means. And the Republicans, it says for number 6, they were pro-French. What that meant is that they felt that our country needed to have a deep partnership with the French in order to succeed. And then they would oppose in 7 and 8 2 other things. A national bank, which we have discussed, which is a government bank that issues money, can take out loans, can sell bonds and all of that. And they opposed tariffs, meaning they opposed these protective taxes, whether it's for imported items or whatever it may be. Okay, so those are the main beliefs of the Republicans or the Anti-Federalists. So let me get the pen out, and in green, we'll talk about the Federalists, who were led by Hamilton, who I know a lot of you know about through the success of the Hamilton Broadway show. So let's go over that. The Federalists, they were led by Alexander Hamilton primarily. Hamilton believed that power in the government should really be held by the wealthy and the educated, that those who are rich and were rich enough to receive a extravagant education, whether it was at a college like King's College or Columbia University in New York, where Alexander Hamilton went to college, he believed that that is where the power should be seated. So that's very different from Thomas Jefferson's beliefs. 3, favored strong central government. Obviously, being a Federalist, Hamilton's going to argue that in order for our government to succeed, our country needs to have a super strong federal government, unlike Jefferson. Number 4, it says emphasize manufacturing, shipping, and trade. What that means is that Hamilton envisioned an economy that was large and expansive, with a stock market, with giant corporations, with international businesses, very different from that of Thomas Jefferson, who said, our economy should hinge on local business owners, small farmers, and things of that nature. 5, it says that Jefferson favored a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So, what that means is that Jefferson believed that you could analyze and interpret the Constitution in many different ways. So, conversely, or in the converse to Thomas Jefferson would argue that you can only do what's written in the Constitution. Hamilton would argue that's not necessarily true, and he would use something called the elastic clause to argue that you could certainly make laws that maybe weren't necessarily listed in the Constitution, and that the Constitution can't list every single law. All right. 6, pro-British. So, unlike the Republicans and Jefferson, Hamilton argued that we needed to have a strong partnership or allied partnership with the British in order to succeed. And then, of course, with 7 and 8, Hamilton's going to favor a national bank, a nationalized bank, a federal bank, which makes sense being a federalist. And he's also going to argue that these national protective tariffs or taxes are also going to be necessary in order for our country to succeed. All right, so that was a lot, I know, because it was going over the difference between those two political groups. All right, let's scroll down. I'm going to skip across this links across time. So to go on to this section, they talk about, let me just circle the paragraph that I'm looking at so you guys know what I'm looking at. This paragraph pretty much goes over some of the details of the Republican and the Federalist Party and some of the things that we did discuss. So it tells us in this first paragraph here that key leaders were James Madison and Thomas Jefferson as far as the Republican Party is concerned. And it said that they were unhappy with the federal government's policies. So we pretty much went over that already, talking about the difference between the two groups. And it goes on to say in this second paragraph that the Federalists took their name from the people that supported the adoption of the Constitution after 1787, and that their leader was Hamilton, which we discussed already. And they go on to discuss other things that we already did discuss in that chart that we took a look at. All right. Let's take a look at this next section called, let me circle it, let me get blue, I guess, organizing and arguing. So it goes on to start off by saying, at the time both parties were organizing, the Federalists had an advantage. President Washington usually supported Hamilton and his policies. One Hamilton supporter running for office proudly said, I am a Federalist, the friend of order, of government, and of the present administration. So Washington certainly had a deep respect for Hamilton and probably was one of his favorites, professionally and personally. You know, like people have a favorite friend or someone that they prefer to hang out more with than other people. That's kind of like what Hamilton was to Washington. So the Federalists did have that advantage because Hamilton could usually persuade Washington to see his viewpoint. So that was something that was of an advantage. It goes on to read that a newspaper editor who supported the Republicans saw the situation very differently. In 1792, he printed a series of questions in the National Gazette, implying that the Federalists wanted to betray the Constitution and bring back a king. So this is talking about how the Republicans and other people who support the Republicans, once again, were afraid that having too strong of a national government was a bad thing. It could lead to a monarchy. All right, let's take a look at this next section, guys. I'm going to circle it with purple. It's called Other Disagreements. And I'll go over this with you guys and give you guys a brief rundown of this. So in other disagreements, it reads that in addition to their fundamental disagreements about the power of the federal government, Federalists and Republicans disagreed about other issues. Naturally, it wasn't just those, 8 issues in that chart that we went over a couple minutes ago. Federalists favored a national bank and a national tariff. The Republicans opposed both. Federalists favored close ties with England, and the Republicans were sympathetic to France, where a revolution overthrew the king in 1789. So once again, it's just kind of reiterating. I'm going to scroll back up. Oh, I want that to stay. Let me erase that then so I could scroll back up. I'm not sure why that's moving with the page. But once again, this section here about other disagreements is essentially going over what I just explained in that chart above about how both parties had a disagreement about which country we should be friends with or whether we should have taxes on certain items and things like that. So let's look back at this last section, or this last part, the election of 1796. This was a shorter section than section 1, so we're almost done, guys. So in 1796, Washington set an important precedent. He said he would not seek a third term. And it wouldn't be until 1940, when FDR ran and won for a third term, would we see a president seek more than 2 terms. It wouldn't be, and they tell you this interesting piece of info too, guys, that in 1951, we finally legally amended the Constitution to limit presidents to 2 terms. So therefore, we're going to have an actual real election in 1796 because Washington pretty much ran opposed, guys, meaning that he didn't really have a true opponent run against him. So in 1796, the Republican candidate was Thomas Jefferson. Seems like a natural order of things, right? Since he was Secretary of State. And then the Federalists, we're going to nominate John Adams, a New Englander, a man from Massachusetts. So a lot of people actually wonder, why didn't Hamilton run or try to run for president? Well, he didn't run for president because he was actually involved in a pretty serious personal scandal that was deeply embarrassing to him and his wife and his family, that was printed in newspapers. And because of that personal scandal, he didn't think people would want to vote for him for president. So not very different from, politicians of today, for sure. So what's interesting, though, guys, is that in 1796, unlike today, the president and vice president were not elected together as a ticket. It goes on to read that instead, the candidate getting the most votes became president, and the second place candidate became vice president. So that would be like right now today having President Trump, who came in first, being president, and having Hillary Clinton, who came in second as vice president. Could you imagine the problems that would exist today if President Trump existed in our current world and then we also had a vice president, Hillary Clinton? We wouldn't get anything done, probably. But anyway, that's just kind of interesting, right? So anyway, John Adams finishes first in that election, and Thomas Jefferson finishes second. Therefore, just like the present day example I gave you guys, the country gains a federalist president in John Adams and a Republican or anti-federalist president, a vice president, a vice president that is a Republican or an anti-federalist in Thomas Jefferson. Of course, like I said, this is going to lead to serious issues in the next 4 years. All right, guys, so that is all I have for this video today. I'm going to upload this to my YouTube channel, and then I'll post this on Google Classroom. I hope you guys take a look at this. So it should give you some insight into the reading. And then with the check your progress, those 4 questions, I'm going to be sharing with you guys a key so that you guys have all that information. All right. And like I always said, reach out to me, email me if you have any questions, concerns, comments, whatever it may be, and keep up the good work, guys. Seriously, you guys are doing an awesome job. Just keep meeting those due dates. And if you guys have any concerns at all, just let me know. Anyway, guys, have a great day, and I'll see you guys later.